I'm very happy to introduce, excuse me, Beth Linder Carr. But I'm also at a loss. Which Beth do I introduce? Her thesis, helpfully titled Paths Converging on Being a Mother, Teacher, Daughter, Walker, Wife, warn us that these paths might converge and possibly collide at a very crowded intersection. And the 200 pages that follow tell us that when it comes to Beth, these 5 named roles, these people, personas, and characters are just scratching the surface. When Whitman tells us that he contains multitudes, he could just as easily be speaking about Beth, and with Whitman-esque awe and admiration. Because these paths actually do converge, however, we don't have to worry that all those Beths will add up to a clinical diagnosis. And we can be confident that she has the writing skills to negotiate these perspectives, as well as the experience as a theater director to stage manage all these characters on the page. And as a result, what emerges is a wonderfully clear and coherent voice. A writer fairly confident in the persons she is, but, and this is very important, still wonderfully curious, still wondering to our benefit who that person really is and who she is in the process of becoming. Just as Beth is not content to remain within even the category she lists or confine her gaze to one direction or purpose, as she walks these paths, her writing also contains multitudes of genres and subjects, points of view and literary devices, even font styles and spacings. And we are still negotiating some of those font styles and spacings, I believe. For example, in one amazing chapter that explores her experience with John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, Beth pairs her own early reading of the book with her students' varying reactions and adds her more recent experience returning to the novel as a graduate student. She references her early publication about the book in the Fresno Bee. She describes a visit to the Steinbeck Center in Salinas, references Steinbeck's own correspondence with an editor concerning the book's moving and consistently controversial conclusion, and adds her own experience as a mother. And although a reader might occasionally wonder just where she's going with all these stories and threads and contexts, not all of them hers, we don't wonder for long because these various paths converge as she has promised, not with a neat conclusion, but in a full comprehensive exploration of why great books are written, what they tell us about humanity and about our individual selves, what literary criticism, book reviews, and even visitor centers can't possibly tell us about the powerful connection we make with books, the way that in telling the stories of others, literature tells us about ourselves, our own complicated, multifaceted, and often poorly understood lives. In another essay, Beth explores her connection with an unlikely role model, Lady Macbeth, an identification a reader might at first find off-putting, not to mention a little creepy. By the end of the essay, which manages to blend her own evolving perspectives and close textual analysis with other interpretations of Shakespeare's works, her experience teaching the Scottish play to her English teachers and directing drama students as they perform some of Mrs. Macbeth's bloody deeds, and her own thankfully less murderous experiences as a wife and mother, I come to understand that I simply have not understood a play I thought I knew pretty well. By engaging with the literary characters from so many directions, including but going far beyond what scholars and professors are likely to entangle ourselves with, we don't necessarily come to agree that serial murder is the best way to climb the corporate ladder. Although we've all done that, right? But we begin to understand the complex mix of oppression and freedom, of love and also betrayal, and what all this has to do with gender, intimacy, loss and connection, all those conflicting desires and disappointments that make us human. I could say so much more about these diverging and then miraculously converging paths. Among my favorite essays in her book is one that follows, but of course is not confined to, an actual path from her home in the Sierra foothills into a landscape she both knows and is still getting to know, threatened by the wildfire we watched with horror last summer and fall. Like everything else in her book, this is both an actual place and also a jumping off spot for broader and narrower explorations, natural history and human history, the complicated, sometimes complementary, sometimes adversarial relationship we formed with the natural world. And of course, landmarks along the way that prompt stories from our own well-lived life, individual perspectives offered by multiple Beths from far away and up close, teacher, parent, wife, mother, walker, and so many, many more. Like the book she's written, it's a path walked by a writer who is much, much more than the sum of her personas, a remarkable individual who is also a terrific writer. I'm very happy to introduce Beth Linder Carr.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. Oh, there I am. Okay. I'm a little bit at a loss for words after I've heard that. Thank you so much. There needs to be crying time built into this whole thing. John has already told you what what the title of my book is, and spoken beautifully about it. And I'm going to be reading an essay that is the first one in my collection, and it's about a walk on some very literal paths. And but first, I have several thank yous. I'm inspired by this land and the foothills that I live on and through which I meander every day. And I'd like to acknowledge my privilege in living and writing here on the ancestral lands of the Mono people. My husband, Michael, has experienced this 5-year return to grad school right along with me, always patient and encouraging along the way. Thank you, and I love you, and he's right over there. I'd like to thank my parents, Barbara and Bill Linder, and my brother, Brett, and sisters, Bonnie and Betsy, for their unwavering support, encouragement, and love. My friend Julie offers me love and wisdom on our long walks together and through life. When I came to my first thesis reading, I was just curious about the MFA program and I wanted to check it out. And Professor Tim Skeen was welcoming and kind to me then, engaging me, this stranger, in a conversation about writing. I will remember that. Jefferson Beavers also welcomed me both before and after I applied, and he has been a calm, knowledgeable, and kind voice throughout my time in the program. I took courses from Professors John Hales, Stephen Church, Chris Henson, and Bryn Saito during my time, and each one has had a hand in helping me to become a better writer and more educated reader. John, Stephen, and Bryn are the 3 members of my thesis committee. John Hales was the teacher of my first class in the program, of a couple in between, and finally of my last class this past semester. He became, for me, a longtime teacher myself, the kind of teacher I had always hoped for, spending hours to read and respond to my work as he does for all of his students. I'm honored that he agreed to be my thesis chair, and thank you for everything, John. I'd like to also acknowledge my summer arts teachers, most notably Kimberly Dark, course coordinator for 4 of the summer courses I've taken. Also shout out to my fellow summer arts compatriots, there might be some here, as well as my fellow students, including Melissa, whom I'm happy to share the stage with this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge my students through the years who continue to inspire me, and a big thanks to all of you in the audience as well. My daughter Zoe is here tonight, zooming in from Massachusetts with her dear partner, Alex. My primary path in life has been as mother, and it is to her that I dedicate this collection of essays. One time she teasingly told me, "All of your best writing has me in it." She plays a huge role, not only in what I write, but in who I am. Ich liebe dich. This essay that I'm about to read is called Piles, and it's the first one in the collection, and I've retired from Sierra High School already. I wrote this while I was still teaching there. In the late summer and early fall, the hardened, dry earth of my path to school barely budges under the rugged soles of my hiking boots. The native grasses have withered and withdrawn to the edges. Because the school year is just starting and because it's on school property, maintenance people routinely keep the trail clear, or my husband Michael does if they're too busy. And I can see where I'm stepping as I head to work on campus. It's easy to skirt the piles left behind by the wild inhabitants of this wild place. My eyes fix reflexively on the ground beneath me. In the winter, I would be seeking out California newts, a type of native salamander which makes its first appearance in December after it's rained. At this time of year, though, in addition to the piles, I'm watching out for rattlesnakes and anthill swarms and smooth cocoa-colored buckeye seeds that gather at the bases of their mother trees. Just released from the tacky, thin covering that protects them while they still dangle from dormant branches, their new baby-like skin is soft and irresistible to the touch. I pick one up and cradle it in my hand, rubbing the flat side with my thumb. On some mornings, I take our new puppy Ellie with me so that she can enjoy the morning walk to school too, keeping me company in my classroom. Michael comes and picks her up before the kids arrive. Ellie, new to the trail, with her super puppy senses and excited curiosity, pulls me toward the piles her wild cousins have left in the night, sniffing so close her nose brushes their sticky surfaces. She also notices things that I don't. She knows what I rarely experience firsthand and can otherwise only infer from these tangible traces, that we are not the only ones who travel this trail. Even though the list of creatures who've crossed my path is long, ants, newts, mice, moles, snakes, skunks, rabbits, fox, wild turkeys, great blue heron, coyotes, deer, only the ants, newts, and turkeys make frequent appearances. The rest remain elusive, showing up when I least expect them, vanishing in an instant like phantoms. Sometimes I wonder if I've actually seen the coyote dashing right in front of me in a blurry, furry leap, and I wish my reflexes were quick enough to reach out and confirm with sight and touch. Their scents permeate the path. Ellie zeroes in on them, yanking the leash this way and that, her nostrils taking it all in like a vacuum. She leaves her own traces here too, including a huge pile on our first walk, dark chocolate brown, peppered with the bird seed she'd lapped up from beneath our finch enclosure. I paused while she squatted. That pile persisted for days, still recognizable, the size, texture, location. I kept an eye out for it afterwards as I walked to and from school without her, a bit of a touchstone right in front of the largest buckeye tree, the decaying mass releasing and planting the seeds. And in the act of looking at her pile, I began to take a closer look at the many others. I think it was one other particular wild pile that then caught my eye and led me to pay more attention to the others. It bulged around a sharp angular shape that I didn't expect to find encased in such a mound, almost as if the creature had ingested a bit of palm frond. But there are no palm trees on this trail, which wends its way through a forest of oak and bay and buckeye. Now, a few weeks later, after the surrounding fecal matter has shrunk and separated away, it looks more like long stalks of dry grass, freed from their stooly encasement, more clearly plant than animal, splayed out like the kind of thatch one might see on a medieval roof. Were you feeling ill? I want to ask the producer of The Stool, remembering all the times my dogs, including Ellie, have sought out fresh blades of grass to gnaw on, only to throw them up later. But these had made it through, and the stool lies untouched, one of the many markers on my daily walk, a bowel movement that hasn't moved, just slowly shriveling into decay. When my daughter Zoe was 5 or 6, we found ourselves sitting cross-legged on the carpet of the children's section of Witwer, a huge bookstore in the heart of Stuttgart. We had a routine. Since we'd been doing this for several summers already, browse the shelves together, gathering piles of picture books whose titles and colorful covers beckoned us. Then we'd sit and I'd read aloud, translating into English on the spot while she listened and laughed and pointed at the pictures. No one seemed to mind. Sometimes she'd ask me to read the same book again, in the original German this time, in this way, taking in the new sounds of what would become her second language. On this particular day, after an hour or so, it was time to leave. We had to meet my students and catch a bus, and so I gathered up the books we had decided to take with us. As an afterthought, Zoe handed me a new book that had drawn her attention. It was small and blue And I didn't really take note of anything else about it, deciding to indulge her, adding it to the purchase pile. Only later, at our host family's home, once again ensconced comfortably on the floor to read, did I see what we had: a small book with a very long title. Vom kleinen Maulwurf, der wissen wollte, wer ihm auf den Kopf gemacht hat. Underneath the title, a dark bluish-gray mole striding purposefully on his black dress shoes, stern expression on his bespectacled face, a swirly pile of dark brown poop balanced on the top of his head. The story of the little mole who wanted to know who had pooped on his head is how I translated the title when I began to read it aloud for the first time, giggling in surprise. Did you have any idea what this book was about? I asked Zoe. She shook her head no, smiling broadly. As soon as it stops raining, in late spring or early summer, the lush native grasses begin to dry out. And like all living things, they do what they can to ensure continuance of their species. In this case, that means we are beset with stickers of all kinds, primarily foxtails, insidious little barbs, hard and sharp, designed to penetrate anything and stay there. It's soil they're looking for, I'm pretty sure, but they also find the plush living room rug, the bottom seam of my knit undershirt, the spot on my pillowcase where I rest my ear. And speaking of ears, they've made their way into Ellie's left one and into her nose, and most recently, 3 scooched their way up into her vulva, we found out later, after a large, round, infected bump appeared at the base of her belly. For the 3rd time, the vet wrote foxtail hunt as the description of the procedure she had just performed. But this time, Ellie came home with a cone around her head to keep her from licking the incision. Keep her out of the weeds were the vet's final instructions. And since we live in a place where the only way to eliminate the foxtails is to wait for the rains and the new grass, Ellie had to stay inside or remain on leash or hang out in the new enclosure out back that we had reduced to bare earth. In the darkness of the early morning, she and I would circle the backyard. And since we were tethered together, I'd be witness to her morning business. She'd sniff, then pee, sniff, then pee some more. Then it'd be time to head to the back corner of the yard, up against the fence, to find a good place to do her other business, near another pile. I'd steer her away from the series of 4 graves that line the fence at the back, in deference to Molly, Jerry, and Dusty, her canine predecessors, and Tozy, the cat she barely knew. When she was ready, she'd round her lower back and daintily lift one leg, balancing on the other, careful to release the stool away from either limb. With flashlight in hand, I'd watch the process, scrutinizing the shape and consistency of her offering, noting anything bordering on diarrhea, hoping never again to see a hookworm as large as the one she had excreted shortly after we first got her, right after giving her some worming medicine. It doesn't seem to bother her when I watch, and watching her makes me wonder what it would be like to bear witness to the untethered animals who prowl on our trail as they take care of their own important business. I started reading, Zoe on my lap. When the little mole stuck his head out of the earth one morning, we noticed before he did the long pointy stool plummeting from above, heading straight for him. Zoe giggled. The mole just wants to see if the sun has come up yet, but instead he is greeted with something round and brown, which looked a little bit like a sausage. On contact, instead of splitting apart or splashing, it forms a nice little coil, perfectly balanced atop his head. The mole's smile has turned into a sneer by the time we turn the page, and he is wailing, "So eine Gemeinheit!" Such a disgrace. Who pooped on my head? He wants to know, addressing the question to the world. Zoe noticed his glasses, and I let her know that he's nearsighted and can't see very well. Then, on the very next page, a dove flies by, and the mole asks her quickly, "Did you poop on my head?" "Look, Mama, the dove is pooping too." Zoe noticed before I looked over. The dove, I realized, was engaged in a demonstration explaining to the mole, "Me? No. How come? This is how I do it." In oversized parentheses, the author had provided both sound effects and a detailed description of the dove's business. Plotch! I struggled to find the right translation. Splash? Splish? Plish? At any rate, the moist white blob lands right next to him and splashes him on the leg. "I've never seen a dove poop before, Mama." Is it really white like that? She asked me. Yes, I replied. It's white like that. The piles are everywhere, I notice now, hyper aware. I wonder what I should call them, and poop is the silly child's word that comes to mind first. But the list of synonyms is long, and I startle at all of the choices once I look it up. Shit, crap, scat, excrement, fecal matter, dung, manure, feces, stool. Number 2, poo, droppings, guano, human waste, turds, fertilizer. Fertilizer? I remember the llamas we used to raise and the neat piles of little brown pellets they used to leave, returning always conveniently to the same 1 or 2 spots, their waste sought after by our neighbors to enrich the soil of their gardens. The wild turkeys leave their mark on our front porch, drinking from the dogs' water bowls, and the rabbits burrow behind the bales of alfalfa and shoot out little pellets. Last year, I found the dark little turds of a visiting mouse in my classroom, much more visible than the visitor herself, whom I only saw once in a brief flash. When the litter box in our cat bathroom fills, I know the dainty little balls come only from Buttercup now, the traces of her deceased companion Tozy now long gone. I remember how hard it was to clean out that box the first time after he died, acutely aware that it was the last bit of him I would see and touch, aside from the few tufts of hair I'd find later clinging to my clothes. Our elderly Australian shepherd Dusty died at the beginning of the summer, and since we knew it was coming, I paid careful attention to her on that last day. She squatted painfully to relieve herself, and in a moment of nascent grief, I crouched in front of the small stool and took a photograph, her last offering to the earth before giving herself. Her remains now mingle with her favorite turquoise blanket, a plush polyester shroud that will outlast her flesh and continue to cradle her bones. A scientist would call the piles on the trail scat, and so I adjust my vocabulary and my thinking, becoming an observer, stopping and looking and keeping a photographic record of what I see. Some of the scat piles, when they're fresh, look like mounds of moist berries and reddish browns. They seem to be glazed with a glistening sauce, and as they degrade, the bumps and lumps shrink gradually until the whole deposit becomes indistinguishable from the soil. Am I witnessing just another form of propagation, I wonder? The clever plants manipulating local creatures to ingest, digest, and then disperse their seeds for them, a method much different from the buckeye trees who discard and drop traces too, a blast of seeds hoping some will take root. Patterns emerge the more I pay attention. I often encounter one pile layered over another one, clearly from 2 different species, the long grayish stool of one mingling with the more diffuse seed-filled mound of another, and sometimes fresh scat is laid over old of the same kind. Did the same animal return to the same spot, or were different animals speaking to each other? Could this laying of pile upon pile be an intricate form of communication, I wonder, with each other, across species, with Ellie, with me? Perhaps the animals, whose identities I can only guess at, use their scat as a way to announce to the world, or at least to those who travel this trail, I was here. Detecting a pattern, I asked Zoe, which animal do you think the mole will ask next? Maybe a rabbit, she replied. But a horse appeared when I turned the page, wearing spectacles like the little mole. 5 big fat horse apples tumble to the ground just as the horse replies to the mole's question. Me? No. How come? This is how I do it. Knocked to the ground and deeply impressed, the little mole hears rumps-de-pumps as the large balls fall much too close to him. Maybe the rabbit is next, Zoe suggested as we turned the page. And indeed, the rabbit was next, eating a carrot, and 15 round little beans shoot out of his bottom in reply to the mole's refrain. Rat-ta-ta-ta! We counted the little poops to make sure the illustrator had been paying attention. He had. The goat on the next page looks a bit dreamy-eyed as he says, me? No, and proceeds to let loose some very pleasant-looking little caramel-colored lumps on the grass. Maybe there will be a cow, I predicted, and Zoe nodded in agreement. The cow's pile is big and brownish green, and the little mole is really happy that she wasn't the one who had pooped on his head. Platsch die plumps, sounds the pig's stinky offering on the next page, falling onto the grass right in front of the little mole. He has to hold his nose. I think that's probably all of them, Zoe told me. We wondered how the story could possibly proceed. Would the little mole ever get an answer to his question? And I wonder, as I amble along the trail, who left this pile here? Was it you, coyote, whom I hear howling most nights, a resounding chorus to the moon that travels through my window and awakens my dogs? Was it you, mountain lion, you who've never shown me your face? The people who work the late shift at school tell me they see you often out on the practice field at the other end of campus. I keep looking for you, twirling around at random times to check behind me. And I should be careful, they say. My elderly neighbor lives at the base of another hill I hike regularly, and he echoes their warning. His daughter saw you lounging halfway up in the middle of the road in the middle of the day, and frightened, she no longer walks alone. What form would I take then, were you to catch and eat and digest and then excrete me? Or was it you, Fox, the one predator we know has gotten under our gate, has killed our chickens, has eluded the big live trap on the front porch that caught our cat instead? The phantom creatures of my imagination squat before me, oblivious to me and my curiosity. The very act of walking induces the urge to go, and I understand now why the creatures around here might find the trail such a convenient place to do their business. There have been times walking when the urge came upon me so suddenly that I thought I'd have to stop and squat on the spot, like an unprepared backpacker with neither toilet paper nor shovel. What would the users of this outdoor lavatory have to say about that? Would they crouch and sniff and wonder themselves, who pooped here? What do you think is going to happen? I asked Zoe before turning the second to last page. Let's find out, she urged me to continue, the same mix of impatience and delight that would grip my German students when I started reading this book to them in the fall. Two big black flies sitting on lumps of horse manure look up when the mole approaches them. Finally, he thinks, someone who can help me, and he spits out the question of the hour. Who pooped on my head? Hold still, they tell him, surprisingly cooperative, and after a moment of sniffing and tasting, they say, there's no question about it. It was a dog. I noticed the increase in font size for emphasis. I knew it, exclaimed Zoe. Really? I asked. I hadn't predicted that answer. The flies make quick work of the pile, and his head now clear and his smile full of a thirst for vengeance, the little mole heads towards the most likely culprit, Hans Heinrich, the butcher's dog. As the dog snoozes in his house, the little mole climbs as quick as lightning up onto the roof, and then pling. A tiny black sausage lands directly on Hans Heinrich's head. The dog's awake now, Zoe noticed his open eye. That mole better hurry up and get out of there. Her voice squeaked a little in concern. But we were happy and satisfied to see that the little mole, only his hindquarters now showing, is also happy and satisfied as he disappears back into his little mole hole. Read it again, Mama. Zoe looked up, eyes wide. In German this time. A few years later, we were in Witwer again, that bookstore in Stuttgart, and I stumbled upon a British translation of the Mole book, as we now affectionately call it, their title, The Story of the Little Mole Who Knew It Was None of His Business. Clever, I remember thinking, and as I read it for the first time, I found few real differences between this official translation and the spontaneous one I had relayed to Zoe so many times. What appears on the back cover, though, caught my attention. Quote, our plucky hero sets out to find out who has left their business on his head. His highly entertaining and informative search reveals an important but often neglected side of animal life, end quote. The whimsy had drawn us in, the clever sound effects and the funny drawings, but the idea that there might be a lesson in the book had eluded me until now. Of course, everyone poops, some species shyer about it than others, and although it's not a part of my regular vocabulary, the language of excrement permeates human speech. I hear it every day. There's always someone who doesn't give a shit about something. And while most animals, like the dove, the horse, the rabbit, the goat, the cow, and the pig, as well as the coyote, the fox, and the dog, lack any inhibition about relieving themselves out in the open or in the presence of others, the closest I've come to not giving a shit about shitting in front of others heralded a seminal moment in my life, the birth of my only child. My labor had progressed slowly, now in its 44th hour. To relieve the pain, I was squatting on the floor of my hospital room, beginning to push, when I excreted a very small poop, just before bringing forth sweet, sweet Zoe, the one who would later discover the mole book that's kept us smiling for years. Ellie is off leash now, free to roam the backyard and pick her own places to do her business unsupervised. I still accompany her sometimes, though, when I need a few moments outside. I notice how naturally she gravitates toward her predecessors' graves, sensing what I can't. Maybe she's trying to tell them something with her small offering to the soil they are resting in, to the soil that they themselves are becoming. Maybe she wants them to know that she's here now, giving a shit, and that they shouldn't worry about me. Now, when she heads in the direction of their graves, I avert my eyes and leave her to her business. Thank you.